Look, I raised this issue last week, which may be the reason for the headlines that have subsequently followed. And I quote the headlines: "Wanted workers urgently." Another: "Workplaces struggle for staff." Another: "Boosting workforce would help economic momentum." Another: "Staffing crisis as flu weighs on the nation." Unquote. Meeting international leaders, lots of photo shoots, visiting Kiev and telling the world that Australia will lead the energy transition to zero emissions and that we're part of the fight for freedom around the world. A lot of this stuff is empty rhetoric, platitudinous nonsense. It is time the new government got down to work. It's one thing to argue that the Albanese government's goal is to focus on training Australians to fill vacancies, but immediate action is needed to avoid productive enterprises being held back by a lack of workers. Even worse, being shut down. There is no evidence of an orderly program facilitating urgently needed skilled migration. Australia's staffing shortages worsened to the point that almost 500,000 jobs are going begging. The number of vacant positions is nearly equal to the number of Australians unemployed. Businesses crying out for federal and state governments to make it easier to bring in foreign workers. In May, the number of job vacancies, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, reached 480,000 in May. Jobs available, a jump of 14% since February, and more than double pre-pandemic levels of about 225,000. Job vacancies. There are currently 548,000 people who declare themselves as jobless, but many of those people are unemployable. Common sense will tell you that a shortage of workers puts a handbrake on business, but it's worse than that. As we've seen with airports, customers face long waits when travelling, not enough staff. As we've seen with restaurants and cafes, they're closed when they'd normally be open, not enough staff. As we see with building projects, you can't employ hundreds of workers on a building project if you can't find a surveyor. We keep talking about post-pandemic recovery. That sounds fine, but employers can't find staff. It's as simple as that, and it's at every level of employment. Closing international and domestic borders flattened migration and labour mobility. Western Australia, for example, had the tightest border controls of all Australian states. No surprise that there are 40% more job vacancies in WA than there are officially unemployed West Australians. A tighter labour market than during the mining boom. This is absurd. What's even more absurd is that there's no evidence that the new government is doing anything about it. This is a labour and skills crisis. The workplace shortages are chronic, and either the employer tries to extend the working hours for existing employees or he shuts the door.